Hi everyone, I'm Laszlo Balassi, founder and CEO of ActiveGraf. In this video, we will show you everything you need to know to be able to create and use powerful interactive scenario analysis dashboards and presentations, which allow you to just click and drag charts to easily iterate even the most complex analysis. We're going to get started with a short overview of why ActiveGraf is for you, and then dive right into using ActiveGraf. You'll learn about GrafData, the TaskPane, chart types, chart formatting features, and how to save, share, and manage ActiveGraf-enabled Excel and PowerPoint files, as well as ActiveGraf package files. Maybe you've heard of this thing called ActiveGraf. Maybe you saw a demo, or you've seen it in action, but now you're about to dive in for the first time. Before you do, you probably are wondering, what can it do? When should I use it, and why? So what can ActiveGraf do? ActiveGrafs are easier than regular charts to make, but they are much more powerful, because ActiveGrafs can drive calculations and models. By clicking and dragging ActiveGrafs, anyone can update assumptions and see the results in real time, right within presentations and dashboards. When should you use ActiveGraf? The simple answer is anytime you're preparing or presenting forecasts, impact, scenario, or sensitivity analyses. ActiveGraf increases the speed of authoring, understanding, and insight, allowing for better and faster decisions. You might be responsible for creating the analytics and presentations. With ActiveGraf, you can focus on what you do best, not wasteful presentation updates. ActiveGrafs update all related charts immediately as soon as you make a change to your calculations. If you are a client-facing professional or support client-facing professionals with analysis and presentations, your team will be able to answer what-if questions from clients immediately, right within a meeting and presentation, rather than the usual, we'll run the analysis again for that scenario and get back to you. Meetings become collaborations with ActiveGraf. Being smarter in response to client needs generates value, better relationships, and faster sales cycles and greater revenues. With ActiveGraf, you will build interactive dashboards and presentations quickly and effortlessly without disrupting your normal workflow. In fact, if you use other analytical tools such as MATLAB, R, or Python, you can use ActiveGraf with those too. Now I'm going to show you how to open and load ActiveGraf-enabled PowerPoint and Excel files. Just as with any PowerPoint presentation, you open up your folder, choose your PowerPoint, double-click, and PowerPoint loads. You'll notice that any ActiveGraf-enabled PowerPoint file automatically opens the TaskPane. That means ActiveGraf is active and you don't have to turn it on separately. Also, the best practice is to click on every single slide that has ActiveGraf content. By clicking on the slide that has ActiveGraf charts, the charts initialize and find any related Excels that are necessary to make it run. This is automatic and a very convenient feature because you don't have to keep in mind which Excels go with which charts, and also you don't even have to know where the Excels are. Once the Excel loads, you can go back to the PowerPoint. It's best to click through all of your slides and make sure that the charts load and initialize. You may find that when you first import an ACTG package, which we'll talk about later, the first load, when the charts initialize, is slower. That's because that's when all of the synchronization tokenizations are built up. So we'll just go through and load every single chart here. You'll see that they load fairly quickly. You don't even really have to wait for them to load when you move on to the next slide and click through. Now, if these charts were attached to different Excels, those Excels would also automatically be open. You can also just open an Excel and it will initialize in a very similar way. The charts will load, the task pane will also open. Okay, so now we'll get started with using ActiveGraf together. To create ActiveGraf-enabled Excel and PowerPoint files, you just create the files as you would any other Excel or PowerPoint files. However, ActiveGraf-enabled Excel and PowerPoint files have to be saved to locally mapped drives or cloud mirrored drives like Dropbox, Google Drive, iCloud Drive, or Box. ActiveGraf also works with OneDrive Professional and OneDrive Personal. The current version of ActiveGraf does not support cloud stream drives like Google Drive file stream. Not yet, anyway. This feature will be added soon. Later, we'll discuss how to save entire presentation packages, including all associated Excel, PowerPoint, and ActiveGraf content, into one easily manageable ACTG file. Next, I'm going to show you the UI components of ActiveGraf. Just open the dashboard Excel file. You'll notice that any Excel that is enabled with ActiveGraf, or any PowerPoint for that matter, automatically triggers the opening of the TaskPane. And that's the first UI component I'll talk about. The ActiveGraf TaskPane automatically shows up on the right, and note that the TaskPane must be turned on if you want to use any of the ActiveGraf functions. Our TaskPane has two tabs, the GrafData tab, which governs and shows the proprietary data structure that we call GrafData, and the Chart tab, which shows the information of the selected chart. Here you'll see the ribbon. So the ActiveGraf ribbon is a series of menu items that allow you to do various things, such as turn the TaskPane on and off. If the TaskPane is not on, you can turn it on by clicking on Open TaskPane. The next icon is the package icon. And what that does is it makes a convenient package of all the content, Excel, PowerPoint, and ActiveGraf content, and it packages it into one convenient ACTG file. The Package All button does the same thing, but combines every PowerPoint and Excel that's open at the given time into one package. The settings and About, as well as Help buttons, are self-explanatory. The last user interface component that I want to show you is the Insert Chart, a very important one, an Insert Chart menu item. So you can go to Insert, go to My Add-ins, and click on the little arrow here, and click on Insert Chart. Now, to make this easier, what we recommend is that you right-click on Manage Other Add-ins and say Add to Quick Access Toolbar. We've already done that, so you can't do it here. And so if you do that, it's much easier to insert a chart because you can just click on this button here and say Insert Chart. Avoid using Excel and PowerPoint in autosave mode. That feature conflicts with the operation of the TaskPane. I'm going to show you how to create GrafData. As I said before, the TaskPane is separated into two tabs, GrafData and Chart. The reason for that is that these are the two components of ActiveGraf. GrafData is the proprietary data structure, and it allows you to identify and synchronize and name data. You can build ActiveGrafs from existing Excels as well as starting new ones. And all you do to create a data set, a GrafData, is to highlight the data that you want to create, click on Create GrafData, and give it a name of at least 3 characters. You can say Webinar 1. Click on Create, and as soon as the green tile comes up, it has now been synchronized into your data library. Remember that GrafData must be at least 2 by 2. The reason for that is each data has to have a category and series name attached to it, and there's the data, so 2 by 2. Now we're going to talk about the optimal data structure for GrafData. On the top left, you see an example here that has indentations for data and no group name, and the data is split into 2 smaller subtables. The problem with that is that when you actually form the GrafData for this whole table, when you look at the actual labels, they come out like this. If you look on the TaskPane, these are the series names, and you can see that they're all over the place such that you can barely read these. And also, you can see how it comes out rather strangely here as well on the legend for the given chart. Also, you should be cognizant of the fact that it's better to form smaller GrafData and have labels often in your spreadsheets because that makes it tight and compact. And so this label system here is much better for the use of GrafData and for the use of ActiveGrafs. As you can see, much more clear the chart. It only shows the data that we want. If we click on there, you can see that all of the data and series labels are nice and neat, tidy and easy to read. And we've split this group too and repeated the headings here so that we can identify, label this grouping as a separate graph data. So again, try to avoid multi-level labels for here, like grouped labels. For instance, this could be, quarter one, and basically if you had quarters here along here, and you had the group by year, that's not very helpful. So it's best to have the labels clear, including all information, one level, and right next to the data that you're organizing into GrafData. ActiveGraf is designed to fit into your existing workflow. If a given column or row header has a label that is too long for use in a graph, no problem. For instance, we have this is a really long header, label here. What you can do is you can keep the way you would model and the way you would label things, and then just click in the chart and change how that specific header is shown in the chart. And you can do that for the purpose of the specific chart. So you can just click in there, and there you go. Right away it changes to short. Also, you can go and change the label if you want, because everything is synchronized bidirectionally, remember. So we can also say that this is a really long header 2, and immediately the chart, all related charts react. So you have two ways to adjust the labels within the chart. One is at a macro level within the data set itself, the graph data, or each chart can branch off with its own specific formatting by changing the labels within the TaskPane under each chart. Now we're going to talk about how dynamic graph data is. So not only are the charts linked to the data and the data linked to the charts, namely if I drag the chart, it changes the data, and if I write in the data, it automatically updates the chart. The actual data structure itself, graph data, are dynamic. In other words, if you'd like to insert a row or column, the data structure follows that insertion and updates all charts accordingly. So for instance, if we wanted to put another row of data row 3.2, all we do is we say insert, and here we say data 3.5, and we just add some numbers in. All data, all charts attached to this data will now allow for this data 3.5 to be here. It's not here now because you've already set this chart, but it is available in the graph data structure, which has been updated. You see it's here now. So if we want to add that data, here it is. We can add data 3.5 right in there. This is very useful. As your model evolves, you may want to change things, and you may want to change the actual content of the data structure itself. And so it's good to be able to insert and change things just as your normal workflow without disrupting all the charts that are attached to it, maintaining those very strong links. The other thing that you can do is actually move graph data, and the links will follow. So I can take this graph data and move it anywhere. And of course, the graph data range will be updated. So if I go to my graph data and I say, I want to see good structure, then you see that the good structure data range is already updated for this new range. You can also copy data sets and place them elsewhere. That will not create a new graph data. That will only create the same thing as you would expect in the Excel, which copies those cells to the range where you targeted them. You can also transpose the data in a chart. So you don't have to restructure a graph data to be able to show it differently in the chart. And this is a very, very useful feature. If we look at the characteristics of this chart, and we'll see here the transpose button, and we can just click that, and automatically ActiveGraf transposes the data to be grouped by series rather than category. This really allows you to maintain your existing workflows and orient the charts as you wish without having to disrupt the typical structure of your Excels. Now let's get into chart types. The data structure for most chart types is the same. Categories along the top of the table and series of data along the left-hand side labeled, and you have your table. That is the chart structure or the data structure for most charts. And those compatible chart types are actually changeable in ActiveGraf. So here's your chart type of column. You can change that to a bar, or you can change it to a line chart. You can also look at the variations like area chart and also spider. Obviously, we also have a table chart type, which looks just like an Excel table. So what are the other data structures and data types? Well, one unique chart type with a unique data structure are pie charts. Those have one series of data, but several categories. It would be like just taking this here. The other single data point chart types are gauge and slider. So let's take a look at some of the unique chart types that are control chart types, and then get back into how to insert and create charts of various forms. Chart types that are unique in their data structure and unique in their functionality are control chart types in ActiveGraf. I'm going to walk you through the 4 types of control charts that we have right next to their data structures so you can see exactly what happens and thereby learn very easily how to use them for version management, for scenario management, and to control various aspects. Firstly, let's look at the radio button chart type. You can create the radio button chart type. This is the data structure for it. And again, a little bit later, we'll get into actually inserting and making these charts. But the radio button chart type has a selectable categories rather. And once you select that, it returns a 1 for that given category. You cannot choose more than 1. The checkbox is very similar to the radio button selection chart or control chart, but it's different in that you can select more than 1, as many as all of them. The drop-down menu is a convenient way to select fixed types of selections, and it returns a 1 to the selected item from the drop-down menu. You can see how that changes. You can also have checkboxes that are vertical, and these charts are formatable. So you can do the same thing here and say, okay, product 2, and select more than 1. And you can see that we've taken a very straightforward approach to make it very flexible and essentially dovetail right into your workflow. When you use the control boxes in ActiveGraf, just remember it returns a 1 to whatever is selectable, and from there you can go on and customize whether it's a selection that drives a scenario or what have you. You can also insert a chart by just highlighting the data that you want to use, and then clicking on Insert Chart, choose the chart type first, and then say Use Highlighted Data. What it does is it will create a graph data instantly for that and set up the chart. So here's our pie chart. What you can also do within a file, within Excel, or within a PowerPoint file, is you can just Control-C and Control-V to clone a chart. You can only do this within one given file because of the complex nature of the synchronization. If you want to clone charts, you can also do that by naming the chart and then selecting the name from the list of charts in your chart library here. Let's also quickly take a look at how to insert a chart in PowerPoint. The process is very much the same, but there's an added design feature. In PowerPoint, you can choose different styles for different charts and different background colors. You can also choose the color palette. This is very useful when setting corporate color schemes and using client logos and so forth. We've designed ActiveGraf to work right within your existing workflows and to make things very simple. And so when you insert an ActiveGraf in a PowerPoint, it automatically chooses the color and color scheme that is compatible with your presentation. So we'll just go in and insert a chart here, an area chart. Click on Area Chart. And we'll use the same data as we used before, good standing. Should find it. There we go. Good structure, not good standing. Good structure 2. And you'll see that immediately ActiveGraf chooses the same background color and the color palette that's chosen for that slide. We'll try it again and show you how that works. Insert. This has a different color scheme, both in terms of its palette and its design. And we'll put in an area chart. Again, we'll choose good structure. There it is. Finds the data based on its name. Very easy. And there you go. And you see now it's compatible with that. The blue line is just the outline. So you can see here how it disappears and blends in very nicely. So a lot of different visual effects can be had with the charts floating, as it were, on the background color. As you saw earlier in this webinar, you can use the quick access toolbar of Excel and PowerPoint to insert a chart. I'll just go right up here, click on the quick access toolbar, and click on Insert Chart. Here we can choose what chart type we want to create. Let's just say we want to create a line chart. And now we can choose the graph data that we want to use to populate it. And we can use it by name. This is one of the big advantages of ActiveGraf, is that it's very human in its approach. You don't have to remember which range, which tab of which Excel you have your data. You remember the name of the data. In this case, I want to use good structure 2. And here it is, good structure 2. Easy to remember. And here we have good structure 2. And that is this data here. So that's how easy it is to make an ActiveGraf. You see this cell changed. I can change this to 250 and vice versa. It also reacts immediately. Now let's take a look at the TaskPane chart tab. And in PowerPoint, when we're looking at it, that's the only tab that exists in the TaskPane because it's in Excel that we establish the data sets, the graph data. In PowerPoint, we're just focused on creating the charts. And so in the TaskPane, you'll find the main macro descriptors and settings for the charts. When you select a chart, there's a blue outline that shows the chart whose parameters are shown in the task pane. So for instance, if I go over to this slide, it's still the other chart that is shown in the task pane until I click on this and I see the blue outline. So let's go back, click select, and we know that the task pane is now refreshed for the data and settings of this chart. So starting at the top, we have the chart name. This is very handy to name your charts with a unique identifier that as it goes into your library, you can choose it and know exactly what chart it is. It's also, again, part of our human approach where you just remember the name of the chart. And if you have a favorite chart, you can just drop it in by name in the clone window. For instance, if you have a favorite comparables chart or a favorite markets chart, you can just insert it by name, which is very convenient and time-saving. The next is the chart type. From compatible chart types, you'll be able to choose from this drop-down window. So we can change it to bar, column, line was the original one, or maybe we had area, area chart, and spider. You can also choose spline to format the lines, any lines, whether it's an area or regular line, to be in the form of a smooth spline. You can also add tags to your charts, so if your descriptor has to do with a specific client and you have a good structure area chart, you can also say client 1 space, and then when you hit the space bar and click out of it, that tag is also useful for identifying this chart from your library if you wanted to place it somewhere else. The assigned graph data is the graph data you chose to populate the chart, but if you need to choose another one, you can go ahead and do that from your graph data library. So if you have a kind of chart that you like, but you want to populate it with different data, you can go ahead and click on the other data set to populate it. This information is very useful because it can tell you which version and from which file that graph data emanates, and therefore making it a little bit less ambiguous as to which graph data you're talking about in your graph data library. The chart style is set at default, and as I mentioned before, when you insert a new chart, it picks up the characteristics of the slide on which you're rendering it. But you can also define styles and then apply them again. So for instance, if we wanted to make this a white chart, we can just do that. White background chart with the default color schemes, gray, and so forth. You can define your own charts. I did one with a pink background, like the color pink, so let's look at the pink background, manage style, and there you go. Let's go back to default. And click on Manage Styles as well. So we can actually save this chart with its color scheme, with the way it's set up, and say Save Selected as Style. And then go into New Item and say, this is, let's call this Gray Modern. And then that's Gray Modern. Moving right along here on the task pane, we can also choose the color palette. Right now it's set to Office. That means it'll pick up whatever the color palette is set for that slide in Office is the color palette that it'll use. But you can also go in and change the color palette here at a macro level. As we said before, you can also make the chart non-editable by clicking on No, Locked. And also you can introduce the element of stacking here for the compatible types that are stackable. Obviously, this is grayed out if it's not a chart type that can be stacked. So you can choose stacked for one on top of the other, and you can also then choose a % stacked. For compatible chart types, you can also invert the axes. This makes it very useful and easy without transposing the data to essentially transpose the chart itself. For area charts, you can do a macro opacity level setting. And this is a very important thing that most people aren't aware of because most charts are not editable in terms of driving data changes and calculation changes. You can choose the minor and major edit interval for when you're dragging the charts to set to a certain level. So here it's by default set at 0.01. Why? Because when you have a percent chart, it automatically works well. But we can set this to, let's say, 10. And set this to 50. And now the minimum edit interval will be 10. So if I grab this and I change it, you see it's only changing by tens. We can also set the chart title here. Again, these are the macro parameters that are in the TaskPane. You can say this is our good structure chart. And goose structure. That's not good. Good structure. And we can also choose the X and Y axes, vertical and horizontal axes, as well as the legend title, and write it in here. I'm going to show you more detailed formatting in the in-chart editing and in-chart formatting functionality that we have, which makes it very easy. Just a few more things to show you now on the TaskPane. One is to show history. You can turn this off, and therefore the chart, although editable, you'll not be able to undo and redo. We have a very convenient function that is built into and set by default in our charts where even if you change value, as I did before, you can go and say, oh, I want to undo all to the original. But it's been re-rendered since then, so let me just drag it and show you the undo chart functionality. Undo all. Goes back. This is very good for in-presentation versioning or while you're analyzing your data and your calculations to undo and redo either by steps or in total. However, sometimes you don't want that functionality. For instance, if you have charts that have only non-editable series in them, sometimes you turn that off to designate that if you don't have the little time bar in the corner, it's not an editable chart. It's an output chart that, although it syncs live and is updated immediately with changes in data, it's not something that you can set and drag. The other is to show tooltip. You can turn the tooltip off because here we have these cool tooltips where you can actually click into them and change the values very conveniently with a number pad or by using your computer keyboard, etc. But sometimes those get in the way, so you can just turn them off. And as you can see here, it doesn't show them anymore. Here's the transpose data function, which doesn't transpose the axes of the chart itself. It actually transposes the data underneath so that you don't have to restructure your data when using ActiveGraf. You can use them just as you would in your normal workflow in your model as you would model it, but then you can regroup by transposing the data and seeing if that makes more sense to have the series exchanged with the categories. Let's go back. One more function is that, remember, we've attached this graph to GrafData, and the GrafData itself has certain series names and series in it. You don't have to use all of them, though, and for the purposes of the specific chart, you can change the data labels. So you can say that I don't want to use these, I just want to use 2 of the data series. And I want to change the labels to international, international and domestic. So these change the data labels for the purposes of this chart only, and it doesn't change the original data. Similarly with category names and labels. Right, so now we have covered the TaskPane and formatting and macro settings for a chart. Now that we've seen how to set up chart-wide parameters in the TaskPane, Let's take a look at in-chart editing for the detailed formatting that we can do with ActiveGraf. But before we even do that, I want to explain one thing. If your chart, on the rare occasion that it doesn't load, sometimes, very rarely, you'll get basically just the ActiveGraf logo in the middle of a chart. All you need to do is to go up to the top right corner until this little arrow box comes up. You click in there and you hit reload. And that takes care of these kind of chart loading things that happen. They happen very rarely, but if they do, no panic. Just click into the box and hit reload. Also, I wanted to mention that if for any reason your computer has been asleep or dormant, the file's been open for a long time, it can happen that charts don't respond. All you need to do at that case is to close the PowerPoint and the associated Excels and reopen them, and everything will work again. So let's just get back into the formatting. As I said, we have this very intuitive in-chart editing and formatting facility in ActiveGraf. You just click on the expand button, and immediately you'll see that the chart elements show up larger, so they're easier to format. And you'll see that the menu is always context specific. When you first open the chart, you can adjust the color palette. You can choose the background color. You can turn the title on or off. You can click on and show the axis legends if you'd like. Same thing with the axis labels. These are on right now. You can click them on or off. The data labels, also you can toggle all of them on or all of them off. In this case, we're just going to put on, say, a few of these. Now, let's use just that one. And you can also turn the legend on or off, or put it on the right, left, or bottom. This button here is the plot area button. And by pressing it, you can adjust the plot area of the chart, such that if you want it to be on one side or the other side, or you want to make more room for bigger numbers, just be careful with this one because it is a exponential curve. So if you move this a little bit on the final chart, it could show up much more significantly. So you have to play around with that a little bit. But let's get back to the main chart. Also, whenever you want to get back to this basic context menu, which is the top chart level, click next to, not on the title, but next to the title at the top of the chart, and it'll always come back to this core menu. But let's get into formatting a series. So let's just click onto this series, which we've already turned on the data labels for. And you'll see that the context menu now shows the same color palette, the color of the series, the color of the marker, or the shape of the marker, and so forth, the color of the lines and all of this. This button is important. This resets the formatting to the default formatting. We'll get into a little bit more detail on that later. This is a great feature. It allows you, with compatible types, to choose an alternate graph type for the series. So if we wanted to make this a combined column and spline area chart, we can do that by just clicking on there. Here we can put these elements in order, so we can send to back or send to front and so forth. Lastly, we have the advanced menu. So you click on that, and on the right you can see that it says if you don't want the series to be editable, you can click on that button to take off that check mark. Basically, it allows you to have this data without being able to change it. So it locks that data, so it's not editable. Also, we have a very, very useful feature here, format link to source, meaning it brings the exact formatting of the characters, including conditional formatting, over from the original Excel, or wherever the source is. So wherever the source formatting is, it brings that exactly, whether it's the number, the font, the number type, and so forth. All the other things are pretty self-explanatory. We've added this very nice feature, which is magnitude, in case you have very large numbers and you just want to round them to thousands or hundreds. For instance, here 10 to the third is thousands. So you can limit the size and make your charts more elegant and space-sparing. And here we have a convenient prefix suffix so that for every number and data label, you can just type in that, and you can see that here the prefix and suffix show up. Right. So now you notice that in this series, one element is black. That's because we have a point editor. And this brings up an important part of our formatting, in chart formatting interface. When you click once on something, it brings up that whole series in the first level of the menu. And if you double click on that single part, then it highlights the next level of the menu. In the case of series, that means this one point can be edited just like the series, but separately to give emphasis and so forth. So I've double clicked on this. Now, if I wanted to rejoin the formatting, this single point, I wanted to rejoin the formatting of the series, all I need to do is click, again, the Reset Formatting button. I can do the same by clicking on the numbers. So you see I click once, and it shows the whole series of data labels. If I click on it twice, it's just that data label that is shown. And once I do double click onto text generally in the chart, you see the context-specific, very familiar text editing functions. If you click onto a chart, so I could change this, for instance, to a larger size or a different font color or whatever. Now, if you go onto text that is editable, when you click onto it, you'll see a little pencil, and that's where the field is where you can change the actual content of the text. Good. Well, let's move on now to the axis labels. If I click once onto the axis labels, it brings up the context menu for the axes themselves, including grid line, label, the axis title I can turn on and off, resetting it to the default, etc. Here, currently, there's no line set, but if we set it to 1, you'll see there's a line there, for instance. We can change the color just as you'd expect. Now, if I go here again, following our click and double click thought process and UI, if I double click, I get the font specific context menu, which can be changed, which allows for font changes. Right? Now, if I go into I'll go back to the axis menu because there's some important features that I'd like to show you in the advanced menu. So you just click on advanced, and here, if we don't want to use autoscale is the default because it's useful for editable charts where you can really run your calculations from the chart and change values. It's useful to have dynamic scaling. But sometimes you want to fix a scale, so you can do that here, or you can change the grid line interval by just choosing that and so forth. And the rest is what you've already seen. One more thing is that the grid line style and format and everything can be adjusted here. And if you want to go back to the default, you can just click on the default. Here you can change the spacing as well, just a more convenient way to do it. Okay. So as I said, if I want to go back to the root menu, all I do is click here. One last thing I wanted to show you in formatting. Again, here in the legend, if I click once, that is the formatting level for the fonts in the legend. So I can just kind of increase all of the fonts or change the font type and so forth. If I double click, what happens is it lifts that specific one out, and I can not only change individually the font and the way the whole character and spacing is, but I can also change the content. If I wanted to change the name of this series for this chart specifically and save it as a different thing, I can do that here. Remember that to save all in-chart editing, you need to click the close button. You can click without saving on the X, and that will save, or that will go back without saving the changes you made. Now let's take a look at ActiveGraf in presentation mode. So as with any presentation, we just click on Slideshow. And remember that these charts are very easy to make, but the auto filtering feature is built right in, not like with other software you have to separately create the filters. This makes it very time efficient to not only create, but also use ActiveGraf in a presentation. For instance, all you have to do is put all related series into one chart. Take a look at the right-hand chart. A lot of data series. But instead of putting different data series that are related over several pages in our presentation, we can simply put one in, saves us a lot of time, and then as the dialogue evolves, click into whichever series is most relevant for the conversation. Our auto-scaling feature makes sure that the scaling is optimal for whatever you've chosen. Now, as you know, ActiveGraf charts are editable, and you can observe the impact of any change in assumptions. So you just click into your chart in presentation mode as well and immediately see what the results are. We also allow you to click into the tooltip and use the up-down arrows, your computer keyboard, or the embedded number pad with touchscreen or with clicking the mouse to get the exact number that you want. We've put a lot of emphasis on making ActiveGraf as human as possible and just what you would expect. If you roll over a series, it highlights that data series in the chart and shows the tooltip so that it's easier to observe the exact nature of the data. You can also do that in the legend by rolling over whatever data series you're interested in. Also, a very useful feature is the undo-redo feature. You can undo all edits to the chart and see what the original was, and then look at the result of any what-if analysis. So essentially, you're creating some minor versioning here. You can also undo and redo by steps. One last thing I wanted to point out about presentation mode is that, remember, you can only click and drag to edit numbers that are natural numbers and drivers. You cannot click and edit calculated numbers. The reason for that is, if we allowed you to click and drag calculated numbers, it would essentially overwrite formulas with numbers. So let's take a look. You try to click and drag an editable number, you can see that it's highlighted as draggable. But if you click and drag a calculated number, it won't allow you. There's no grab bars or highlights. What it will do is if you try to click and drag, it will zoom in on that area. This is also a useful feature, and a separate feature is that any ActiveGraf is zoomable. Just click on the area you want to highlight, and it zooms in. This is very useful for very detailed charts with a lot of data points. To reset zoom, all you need to do is click on the Reset Zoom button. In this session, I'll walk you through how to save, package, import, move, copy, and send presentations. As with any PowerPoint and Excel, it's a good idea to save things often. Just click on Save, and you're done, right? Well, not exactly. With ActiveGraf and the ActiveGraf-enabled content, you can make very convenient packages of everything, your associated PowerPoints, Excels, and all the ActiveGraf content in one convenient package. We recommend that at any major level of work, any major completion of work, you create a package. And what a package does is it saves all the content in one place. The way to package files is, firstly, to save them as the PowerPoint and Excel files. Click on that. And then click on the ActiveGraf ribbon. You'll see that there's a package button. Just click Package File. And when the dialog box opens, make sure you've saved everything as we said. Click Next. And here you have the opportunity to add files to the package. So let's go ahead and add some instructional files to this so that the person that receives and opens this can read the install info. We can also add and change the names. For instance, give it a version, date, and press confirm. Now the package is ready and we're ready to save. among our other ACTG packaged files, and we can just give it its own name, use the date again, and we are done. Now, the PowerPoint and any Excel that it needs has been saved and packaged into one convenient ACTG file. I'll get to how to import those in a second. First, a few tips. As I said in the opening files section, it's a best practice to click through your presentation and make sure all charts are loaded. This way, when you save them, you can be sure that all the data are tokenized and refreshed as appropriate and saved in the correct form. Now let me get to Package All. So if we click Package All, what it does is it saves not only this PowerPoint and the associated Excels, but any PowerPoint that is opened and any requisite Excels for them to work. So you can make bigger packages that rely on the same Excels or set of Excels that have more than one PowerPoint associated with them. Creating packages is also the basic way and a very useful way to create versions of presentations. So before you go into a presentation, you create a package, and as you're using that presentation, it may change because you're doing scenario analysis. So once you're done with the presentation, you can also save package, and then you have a separate version. Now I'm going to show you very quickly how to import these saved packages. Now keep in mind, to package an Excel and PowerPoint file and all ActiveGraf content together is great. You can only export it and package it if you have ActiveGraf, but you can also import them if you have ActiveGraf. I double-click on the ACTG file, and you'll notice that, as with many software, sometimes the window doesn't jump to the fore. So you just find it, it's flashing in orange, it says. Now, here's our import panel. When you're importing files is the best time to rename them and relocate them. So anything in an ActiveGraf ACTG package will come up here. There could be many PowerPoints and many Excels if you use Package All, or one PowerPoint and many Excels also. When you're importing is the best chance to rename them. We'll get into Save As a little bit later. So you can click into the name and say V2, for instance. ActiveGraf will not allow you to save the same file name to the same location to make sure that the tokenization is stable and works well. You can also click in to select the folder and change the folder to whatever you wish. Keep in mind that you can only save ActiveGraf enabled files to local drives or Box, Dropbox, and other non-streaming cloud drives. So we just click Import, and when the import is done, you have the option to either import the directory where it was imported to, or click Finish. Now we can also do this with Excel. There's a little bit of a difference. When you package from Excel and you click Package, it will only create an ACTG file with the Excel and ActiveGraf content in that Excel and associated Excels if you have charts that have graph data that are from other Excels. In other words, you're one step lower in the pyramid. You're basically looking at the calculations and packaging those. The functionality is the same. So we've gone through how to save files, how to package them, which is really the saving in ActiveGraf. If you're saving ActiveGraf content in packages, it's really packaging them. We've gone through importing them. And then let's talk about sharing in your normal workflow ActiveGraf enabled files. So if you send just the PowerPoint file as a PowerPoint, you will only send the frames in which the ActiveGraf enabled graphs are located. But because you're not saving and packaging the ActiveGraf content, that won't go through. So there's a workaround. If you're sending something to somebody who doesn't have ActiveGraf, you can very simply just save this as a PDF file, export it as a PDF file, print to PDF. Just remember to set the charts as you would want them to be in a static position. Also, you'll recall that I said if ever a chart gets stuck, you simply click on the corner of that chart and this little menu item will come up. Here, there's another feature. If you don't want to export to PDF and you want to use the PowerPoint file, again, you can also show as saved image. That means that it turns the ActiveGraf temporarily into a picture, and then when somebody sends it back to you, if you put it back into the same location, you can revert this process. Because you have ActiveGraf, you can turn it back into an ActiveGraf by clicking here and saying show as ActiveGraf. Now I'm going to explain to you how ActiveGraf works in save as format. So if you wanted to move a file, you can also do it and rename it by clicking save as. Let's take a look at what happens. So here are your ActiveGraf enabled, your charts and your ActiveGrafs, and you're in an ActiveGraf enabled PowerPoint file. Click Save As. Choose a new name. Say this is use case 3, and save. Now you'll notice that ActiveGraf will go through, and it's going through all the charts here in the background, and it's creating essentially clones of all the charts in the original presentation. So this file is now a new file, yet the charts are attached to the same graph data. This is very useful if you're doing different versions of what are essentially the same data and calculations behind, but you want to adjust the way the entire presentation is presented. On the other hand, we'll click into a Excel and show you that save as in Excel. Let's do the same thing. We'll say this is 3. The logic is slightly different with Excel, and the reason is that Excel also carries the graph data. So you'll see that the TaskPane flashes, it reloads, and now it has cloned the graph data, not the charts. I mean, if there were embedded charts here, it would also clone those charts, but you've now essentially renamed and possibly relocated your Excel, but now you have a fresh set of graph data that are clones of the original graph data. So it's a file with the same structure, but now you have an independent library of the exact same graph data structure. And that can also be very useful if you want to put them on another kind of presentation and you just want to replicate the structure of an Excel together with its graph data structure. If you rename or move files, the Data Connection Wizard will immediately pop up and make it very simple for you to reconnect your presentations and dashboards to your original Excel or to alternate versions of the same Excel. You can also initiate the Data Connection Wizard yourself from the ActiveGraf ribbon, allowing you to have several versions of the same analysis and alternate between them. As you can see, you just click into the Data Connection Wizard, find your file, click OK, and you're almost done. Here, it's very important to save and close all PowerPoint and Excel files and save them first. Then click OK, and ActiveGraf will automatically reopen your now connected presentation and model. If you'd like to get in touch with us or have any questions, you can contact us through our website, ActiveGraf.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube for updates and new use case demos. Please note that there's a QA panel on our support webpage. If you have any questions, it's worth checking there first. Thank you for your attention. You are now ready to quickly and easily create your very own fully interactive predictive dashboards and presentations with ActiveGraf.